Out where the wind forgets to stop, where dust gathers like memory on the bones of fences, there stood a house. Not much to look at. Sloped roof weathered like an old hat, one chimney that coughed more than it smoked, and shutters that creaked. Even when the breeze was gentle, but it wasn't the house people remembered. It was the man who lived in it. He'd once been called by a name, but time had peeled it from him like bark from old pine. Now folks in town simply called him the man who buried his wife in the spring floods. And that was enough. He lived alone. Some 10 miles off the main trail, where the grass grew mean and wild and the coyotes ran in silence. He rose before the sun and slept long after it fell. His world ticked not by hours, but by the weight of work fencing, hauling water, mending saddles, feeding stock. One chore rolled into the next until the years blurred together like dry ink on a forgotten ledger. They said he never smiled. That he didn't talk unless the wind howled too long and he had to hush it like a frightened child. Children whispered stories about him, how he talked to ghosts or kept bones in his cellar. Old women in town would cross themselves when his name was spoken and mutter, "A man with eyes like that's seen too much," but he never answered back. He'd nod when he came to town once a month, maybe to buy coffee, salt, and tobacco. He never stayed longer than he had to. Never visited the saloon. Never looked anyone straight in the eye. Not even the preacher. The only time he'd spoken more than 5 words to another soul was 3 summers back, when Reverend Allen suggested he consider taking a wife again. "There's women still," the preacher had said gently. Who'd take kindly to a man with a roof, a steady hand? The rancher had stared down at his calloused fingers. There was a long silence before he spoke. "My hands were made for burying," he murmured, not holding again. And that was the end of it. His days stretched on in silence, broken only by the crack of firewood or the groan of leather as his saddle aged with him. The only voice that remained in that house was the memory of her laugh, the woman he'd buried. When the rivers rose and took the whole bottom field with them, she wasn't spoken of much. But she was everywhere, in the yellow ribbon tied to the barn post. Frayed, but still fluttering, in the rocking chair on the porch that creaked even when no one sat in it. In the silver comb he never moved from the table by the bed. That evening began like many others. The sky was low and sullen, clouds dragging across the plains like wounded cattle. He'd spent the day in the far pasture, setting a trap for the coyotes that had been taking his hens. His shoulders ached. His boots were thick with dust and old manure. Thunder grumbled faintly on the edge of the world. He lit the lanterns early, knowing the storm would find him before nightfall. Inside the cabin the air was dry and quiet. The wind rattled the window panes like restless hands. He poured coffee, sat at the table, stared into nothing. That's when the rain came. It came sudden and wild, sheets of it slamming against the roof, sweeping sideways like it wanted to peel the house from the earth. Lightning cracked open the sky. Thunder followed behind, hoofbeats of God's temper, and then something knocked. He paused, set his mug down. Not the wind. Not a branch. A knock. 3 times. Faint, but certain. A hand. Not a storm. He took the candle from the table, shielded its flicker with his palm, and moved to the door. When he opened it, the wind nearly stole the flame. But the light caught her. She stood like something torn from a dream or a nightmare. It was hard to tell which in that moment. A girl, no, a woman, young, maybe mid-20s, soaked to the bone. Her dress was white once, but now it clung to her like ghost skin, heavy with rain and dirt. Her veil was torn, one side tangled in her hair. Her bare feet bled into the porch boards. Her face was pale, eyes wide with a kind of fear that had nothing to do with the storm. She swayed on her feet. He opened his mouth, but she collapsed before any word came out, straight down like her strings had been cut. The candle nearly fell from his hand. He knelt beside her. Steady as the mountain behind his pasture. She wasn't unconscious. Not fully. Her chest rose in shallow gasps. Her lips were cracked. Rain ran from her brow, mixing with something pink, blood or bruise. It was too dark to tell. He pressed his palm to her forehead. Not fever. Frost. That's when he saw the paper in her hand. clenched tight, fingers blue with cold. A letter, maybe. The ink had bled down the parchment like tears. She was still holding on. He gathered her up like something sacred. Not with urgency, but with care. Like he might break her if he moved too fast. Her head rested against his chest, her hair tangled in his shirt. He stepped inside, kicking the door shut behind them. The storm screamed outside. Inside, the fire burned low, and his world, silent for a decade, now had a pulse that wasn't his. Rain has a way of staying inside the bones. Even after the sky clears and the fire's been stoked, it lingers. In the creak of old joints. In the silence between words that never come, she slept for almost 2 days, wrapped in a quilt hand-stitched. By fingers long gone, her breath rose in slow, uneven rhythms. The lace at her wrists was torn and stained. Her shoes, mismatched and waterlogged, lay by the door like tired animals who'd wandered too far. He didn't try to wake her. He simply sat by the fire, hands folded, eyes heavy with something older than sorrow. The dog lay curled by the hearth, one ear twitching at every thunderclap. Outside, the storm danced like it had something to prove. Inside, the candlelight flickered soft against the walls. He looked at her then, this stranger who had collapsed on his porch like an unanswered prayer. Her face was hollowed, not by hunger, but by something deeper. As if grief had carved its name behind her eyes and never left, and in the hush of the storm, he whispered not to her, not to himself, but to the space in between. I buried one woman in the rain. I don't want to bury another. When she finally woke, she said nothing, not a word, not a question. She only blinked at the ceiling, blinked again when he placed a cup of warm coffee by her side, and turned her head away. He didn't ask for her name, didn't ask where she came from, or what drove her through the storm in a wedding dress that looked more like a shroud than a garment of joy. He just brought her coffee each morning, left it on the small stool beside the bed, and chopped a little more wood than usual. That was the rhythm of it. She drank a little, ate less. The dog, old and limping, would sit near her boots and look up as if he too was waiting for her voice. She didn't write, didn't weep, just stared out the window as if expecting something to rise from the plains. Something worse than rain. He found her boots drying by the fire one night. The sole was cracked, the stitching gone, so he mended them not with fancy thread, just with patience. Then he patched the torn lace of her sleeve, matching it as best he could to the other side. That night he left a small wooden bird on her pillow. It was something his wife had carved long ago, back when her laughter filled the rafters. He'd never parted with it, but it sat now, gentle and feathered with age, beside the woman who wouldn't speak. She held it in her hand the next morning. Didn't smile, didn't cry. Just held it, like she understood it had been given, not loaned. It was Martha who came first. Martha, the widowed shopkeeper from town. Thick-hipped, sharp-eyed, mouth always 3 steps ahead of her thoughts. She arrived with a basket of bread and questions carried like daggers. I heard things, she said at the door, peering past the rancher's shoulder. They say you've taken in a girl, a bride. What in heaven's name? He didn't flinch. She ain't mine, he said, voice flat as the prairie. But she's cold, that's enough. Martha stepped back like she'd touched flame. But she left the bread and didn't come back for weeks. The silence continued. Not cruel, just quiet. The kind of quiet that grows between people who are learning how to exist near each other without asking too much. One day, she stood at the fence line, watching the horses graze. The sky was soft that morning, still unsure if it wanted to rain. Again. The wind carried the scent of wet earth and old wood. He stood beside her, arms crossed, eyes far. And then softly, as if the word had been waiting inside her throat too long, safe. That's all she said. He nodded just once. Didn't speak back. Didn't have to. After that she stayed outside more. Worked beside him without direction. She watered the seedlings. Fed the chickens. Rubbed liniment into the horses' aching legs. She never asked what to do, just did it. As if her body remembered how to live, even if her mouth had forgotten how to speak. The dog, once loyal only to the rancher, began to follow her. Wherever she went, under the tree for shade, down to the creek for water. He padded behind her like a shadow with a heartbeat. At night, she sat near the fire, hands curled around warm mugs. He read old letters by candlelight. Nothing passed between them but the sound of breathing and the occasional creak of the rocking chair. Still, she hadn't smiled. Not once. It was nearly a month before she followed him out to the grave. He didn't visit often, once every season maybe. The small wooden cross stood on a hill just behind the barn, beneath a crooked cottonwood tree. Her name wasn't carved on it, only a yellow ribbon tied in a bow that had long since lost its color. That night he knelt in the dirt, one hand to the cross, the other curled in his lap. She stood behind him, unsure, watching. His shoulders shook. Once, then again, he made no sound. But his body did. She stepped forward slowly, not to interrupt, not to comfort, just to be there. And then she laid a single wildflower beside the ribbon. That was all. The moon watched in silence. Spring arrived slowly, dragging warmth behind it like a reluctant child. The frost receded, the soil softened. Birds returned. She wore a patched skirt now, one he'd kept from his wife's chest. It fit awkwardly, but she moved better in it. She no longer looked like a bride from a lost procession. That morning, she sat on the porch step, hands wrapped around a mug of coffee. The sun painted her face in gold. Her hair had grown softer, no longer crusted with rain and fear. The dog lay at her feet. He was beside her, quiet as ever, sipping from his own chipped mug. And then, her voice fragile but clear, "Do you think the land forgets a woman's footsteps if she runs far enough?" He didn't answer, just turned, slowly, to look at her. And for the first time, her eyes didn't flinch. Dawn came soft that day, like a secret it wasn't sure it should tell. The prairie yawned in gold and pale blue, the kind of light that felt like forgiveness. But she didn't feel forgiven. She stood alone by the fence post, the wind moving through her patched dress like breath. The crumpled letter still in her hand. It had dried by now, but the ink ran like tears across the parchment. Her eyes followed the road behind her, that long spine of dust and regret. She looked at it the way a soldier might look at a battlefield, not with fear, but with the knowledge it could still kill her if she wasn't careful. The letter had no envelope. No name on the front, just her mother's handwriting, delicate, thin as smoke. "I hope you forgive me for staying quiet. Some women survive by silence. Some don't. I chose to keep breathing, even if it meant closing my eyes to what they were doing to you. I'm sorry." She didn't remember when she'd first read it. Maybe the second day on the ranch, maybe the third. But she hadn't really heard it until now. The past had finally caught its breath and found her. She had been promised to a man with silver teeth and no soul, a railroad man, wealthy, sharp shoes, smelled of cigars and leather. He came into town one autumn, looking for land and something to anchor him, something obedient. Her father, who'd lost his dignity somewhere between poker games and liquor bottles, offered her like livestock. "She's young, pretty enough," he said. "She mind if you're firm." There was no wedding, just a handshake and a time. The man never showed for the ceremony, but the agreement remained. Signed on paper, not on hearts. So her father, angry and desperate, struck a new bargain. Another man, rougher, richer, far less patient. She ran before the ink could dry. The veil still hung over her face when she slipped out the back door. Her shoes didn't match. She had $3 in her pocket, and a letter she'd taken from the kitchen drawer. She hadn't looked back, only forward, only toward whatever road would take her furthest from being owned. That night, she shattered. The barn held the sound like a womb, her screams raw and animal, bouncing off the beams and hay bales until even the owls grew quiet. She ripped the letter in half, then in quarters. Then in trembling hands she tried to put it back together. The rancher didn't enter. He stood outside the barn door, one hand resting on the old shovel, the other clutching a lantern. He didn't flinch at her cries, didn't hush her grief. He let it rise like thunder. When she was done, breathless, broken, on her knees in the straw, he opened the door gently and placed the lantern beside her. No words, just light. She didn't speak for 2 more days, and then, one morning, while brushing dust off the porch rail, she asked him, "Why didn't you ask who I was?" He looked at her like he was trying to see her and the world at the same time. Didn't need to, he said. You were cold. That's all I saw? She looked away, and this time she smiled. Just a flicker, but it was real. After that, she began to live again. She learned to ride, stiff at first, scared of the animal's power beneath her, but he was patient. He didn't teach like a man who needed her to succeed. He taught like a man who didn't mind trying again. She began to hum when feeding the hens. Folk songs, soft and low, the kind that belonged to mothers in dusk. The dog slept at her feet now. He no longer waited by the rancher's boots. He had chosen her. She sometimes watched herself in the mirror now, not with shame, but curiosity. As if asking, who am I now that I am no longer someone's property? But peace never comes without someone trying to shatter it. Whispers began in town. The kind that grow legs. They called her the porch ghost. Some said she was the rancher's sin. Others called her a runaway bride, hiding from judgment in a man's shadow. The preacher's wife, a bitter woman with a long tongue, asked him directly one Sunday, "Is it true she sleeps in your house?" The rancher didn't blink. "She sleeps under my roof," he said, "just like the storm once did." They told the preacher he needed to act, set an example. Protect decency. So the preacher rode out one morning, Bible in hand, righteousness in his eyes. The rancher met him at the gate, sleeves rolled up, dirt on his hands from fixing the irrigation line. "I come with concern," the preacher said, "for your soul and hers." The rancher leaned on his shovel, his voice slow, deep as a canyon floor. A man who's known grief. He said, "Don't throw stones at another's ruin." The preacher left with dust on his coat and nothing else. Then came Tommy. He was a boy from town, no more than 12. Wild hair, gap-toothed, always chasing something. One morning, his pony spooked on the trail near the ranch and threw him hard against the rocks. She heard the scream before the dog barked. She ran barefoot through the fence line, faster than she knew she could. Blood on the boy's forehead. His ankle twisted wrong. She carried him, cradled in her arms, skirt torn at the knee. Back to the cabin, the rancher tended the wound. But it was she who calmed the child, she who whispered to him while he shook. Later, his mother wept in gratitude. The town grew quiet for a while after that. Whispers turned into nods. Not everyone, but enough. Spring bloomed like a secret. The land softened. Flowers rose where bones had once laid. The rancher built a second chicken coop. She planted herbs by the window. She laughed once, just once, when the dog sneezed into the flour bag, and then, one morning, she rode into town on her own. She needed sewing thread. Said she'd be back by noon, but when she returned, the sun behind her, the wind soft in her hair, she saw him, waiting at the gate, the man with silver teeth. Not in his mouth now, but in his smile. Clean, confident, holding legal papers in one hand, a smirk in the other. Her old fiancé. The road hadn't swallowed her past. It had delivered it home. The sun was high and unforgiving. No clouds, no birdsong, just heat rippling over the land. Like breath off a fevered brow, he waited at the gate like a man sure of his own shadow. Dressed fine, boots shined. Legal papers folded neatly in one hand, arrogance stitched into every seam of his vest. She rode in on the old mare, skirt trailing with dust, a bundle of twine and sewing thread tucked under her arm. But when she saw him, the bundle fell. She dismounted slow, silent. The rancher stepped out from the barn, rake in hand, brow furrowed under the brim of his hat. He didn't ask who the man was. He didn't have to. The wind picked up just enough to move the dog's ears, just enough to lift the edge of her hair. She walked toward the fence barefoot, the earth warm beneath her solace. Steady, grounding. The fiancé smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I'll keep it plain," he said. "You disappeared before papers could be filed. Still, there was an agreement. And you, miss, made me look like a fool?" He raised the papers slightly, not offering them, just showing the threat. "You come back with me, quiet and respectful, and we settle it. Or I take this to the judge and claim what's owed, a bride, or her weight in land." She said nothing for a long while. The rancher moved beside her, slow, deliberate, not to shield. Just to stand where truth stands. She didn't look at him. She looked at the man who thought he still owned her, and then she spoke, voice low, firm as hammered steel. "You don't get to name me," she said. "I've named myself." He scoffed, stepped forward, but a sound rose behind him, soft murmurs and boot steps on dust. It was Martha. And behind her, Tommy's father. And then others, men and women who had once whispered. Now quiet in solidarity. Martha crossed her arms. "I reckon this land's tired of men who measure worth in signatures and shame," she said. The fiancé faltered. Laughed once, bitter and sharp. He looked at the crowd. Then at the woman he'd lost. Then at the rancher with hands like carved oak. And he spat on the dirt. "You deserve each other," he muttered and turned. Kicking dust behind him. No one followed. Not a word was said until his figure disappeared down the road like a lie finally caught in the light. That night, the cabin held a stillness deeper than silence. The rancher sat by the fire, hands resting in his lap. She stood by the window, watching stars scatter like silver seeds. He didn't look at her when he spoke. "I thought I'd buried my heart with her," he said, voice dry as cedar. "Thought the ground took it when it took her. But it kept beating, every time I saw you choose to stay." She turned then, slow, like the moon easing through cloud. "You didn't rescue me," she said. "You saw me." She stepped closer. "That's what saved me." Morning came with soft gold light across the porch. She walked to the barn wall and stood still for a long time. Then she took the torn veil, worn, muddy, its lace shredded, and hung it on a nail beside the door. Moments later, the rancher stepped beside her. In his hand, the yellow ribbon from the grave. His wife's. He didn't look at her. He just tied the ribbon beside the veil, not over it, not in its place. Just next to it, nothing erased. Just honored differently. They built a second room that summer. He cut the boards. She sanded and painted. They argued about where the window should go. Soft bickering, the kind that ends in laughter, not silence. The dog grew lazy. Fat on table scraps and sun. The garden bloomed like it had been waiting all its life to be. Tended by both hands, they didn't speak of love, not with words. They spoke in shared chores, in refilled mugs. In the way he checked the sky before she rode out. In the way she folded his shirts and left a feather tucked in the pocket of each. Late August came with fields turned gold. Sky stretched wide, wind slow and warm. They rode side by side across the pasture, not fast, not urgent, just together. The dog ran ahead, barking, tail wagging like it belonged to a much younger pup, and from the porch Martha watched them ride. She smiled, not wide, but deep, and whispered to herself, "Lord, ain't it something when broken things bloom?"